Access Fort Wayne offers reflections of our community. Production facilities provided by Access Fort Wayne are a service of the Allen County Public Library. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily represent those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting organizations. For more information about creating your own television program with Access Fort Wayne, call 421-1250.
Hello, and welcome to our show, The American Veteran. I'm Dale Parrish, your host. Carl Fowler is our co-host. Our guest today is Vicki Khouli. Welcome to the show, Vicki. Also with us is Don Thur. Don, after he was on our last show about a month ago.
Yes.
And he told me about this book called The Ominous Odyssey, written by Herbert Klug. Herbert is the father of Vicki here. And I'd like to read the first sentence on the back of the book. At midnight on May the 30th, 1939, a German liner left New York Harbor bound for Hamburg, Germany. Among the passengers were Walther and Hertha Klug and their 3 children. One of the children was Herbert, Vicki's dad. Now, all of our shows so far has been about our veterans. Several of them has fought in Germany against the Germans. And this book is about the receiving end. This family moved to Germany right at the most inopportune time. Vicki, why don't you tell us how your grandparents, how they came to this country, how they met, and take it from there.
Well, my dad's father, my Opa, had the opportunity to come to the U.S. They didn't have a lot of money. And he was the chaperone for my grandmother, actually. And he was a very responsible person. He was one of the kindest people I ever knew. 6'1", very handsome. But my Oma didn't want anything to do with him. So when they came over, my Oma was about 4'10", and very, very much a spitfire. Just very, really had an opinion about everything. And so she didn't want anything to do with him. But eventually she came to see his good qualities. When they settled in the country, that was a tie with Germany, and she was very homesick. And so they ended up marrying, and they settled in New York. They lived in Manhattan. So I spent a lot of time in New York growing up.
Yeah. She didn't want to come to this country, did she?
She did not want to come at all. She loved everything German,
Yeah.
But her parents felt that this was a good opportunity for her.
That was the 1920s, I believe.
Oh, it was, I want to say 25 was when they actually came. And so then she thought that she would maybe stay for a while and go back. But then they married, I think, in 26, sorry. They were married in May of 26.
Yeah.
Which was before my time, so
Yeah.
a little bit before my time.
Yeah. They had their 3 children.
Mm-hmm. My dad was born in 28,
Yeah.
and he and my oldest, they had 3 children. Rosemarie was born in January. She was about a year older than him. He was born in February of the next year. So they were really close. They were so close in age, they did everything together. And really until they both died within a year of each other, just about. He died last year, and she died the following October.
Who's this?
The first 2. My Aunt Romy was the oldest one, Rosemary.
Yeah.
and then my dad was born the following year. So they were just a year apart, and they died actually the same year. They were good friends, best friends their whole life, really.
Yeah.
And then the third one, she was much younger than they were, and so they didn't quite have the same close tie, was Hannah Laura. And she was very, very beautiful, very movie star. She never married and lived in Manhattan all her life. So they had the 3 children, and they lived in New York all their life. My grandparents did.
Okay. And why did they decide to go to Germany?
Well, my opa had a good job, and we always knew, growing up, like I said, my dad didn't talk, nobody did. My aunts, my parents, nobody talked about the war. We knew that they had been there during the war, just vague references to things, but they didn't really talk about it. And so reading the book, when my dad was writing it, took him about 7 years, and so he would finish a chapter and he would give it to me as, oh, this is so amazing, you know, this is really cool. And so I would kind of read through that whole thing. And I really didn't know a lot of the stories until you kind of read through the book, basically. But
Did they become citizens of the U.S.?
My opa was. He got his citizenship. My oma didn't speak English well enough, and so the 3 children that were all born in Brooklyn, of course, were American citizens.
Yeah.
They were all born here.
Yeah.
And my oma always wanted to go back home. Everything German was always the best.
Now, what are you calling her? Naoma?
Oma.
Oma.
Your Großmutter is actually grandmother, but like Granny is Oma.
Oh,
and
okay.
and my opa, that's the Gramps kind of thing.
Okay.
So Oma and Opa was just, this is what we always call Oma and Opa Klug.
Okay.
You know, that's what you always called them, because they spoke German at home. We all understood German a little bit. I studied German in school. I went to St. Paul's downtown here, so I studied German a little bit in school and then in high school as well. But we knew that when Opa lost his job and he wasn't making enough money, Oma would be on him to, you know, go back to it's just you could see it even if you hadn't been there, that she was saying everybody in Germany has a job, the economy is really good. And truthfully, people were coming from Germany and they were saying, oh yeah, the economy's booming, people are, you know, getting hired, everything's going well, because Germany had been so devastated after World War I that the German people, who tend to be relatively hardworking and, you know, and want to be proud of themselves, they were really trying to rebuild. They were very just ready. And so that German pride, that nationalism that Hitler appealed to, they didn't really, I guess they didn't really expect him to gain such prominence. And so they're like, everything's fine, everything's calm, which is what people tell you, you know, when you're looking from the outside, sometimes you can see it a little better. Yeah. So they purchased, they got on the liner. This is the picture of my opa, my grandfather, and my dad. And he was really young. It was maybe, what, 10 or 11? I don't remember how old. Do you remember how old he was?
I think
really little.
About 10.
About
yeah.
10, maybe.
Yeah.
And this was the shipboard steward that kind of took them under his wing, and he became good friends with them. And so they got on in May of 1939 and sailed for Germany.
And what was his name? The one that took him under his wing?
I just read it. I forget.
Oh,
I forgot his name. I just looked at it a minute ago. But they were, because he, like I said, I didn't know about him, but they were good friends on the ship. And so, and everything seemed okay when they got there. It was calm, and, you know, they sold up everything they had in New York, let their apartment go, everything, and just packed up. Oh. And they had family in New York too. My Oma, my grandmother's brother and his wife lived there. And so there was a lot of people that were there. My grandfather's sister also lived there, and her husband in New York. Yeah. So they did have family there as well.
Yeah, sure.
But it's just, I mean, really, to the end of her days, my grandmother loved everything German and hated Hitler, had always hated Hitler, but, you know, did not equate Hitler with Germany.
Yeah.
Well, we have that with our politicians too.
Sure,
you know?
absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
You know, that's
Yeah.
Now, you said they went over in 1939?
In May of 39.
Okay, and that
And
was
then,
just before Hitler
August,
really
September,
came into
Hitler
his full power. wasn't
invaded Poland that fall.
Started flexing his muscles then.
Yeah.
it? Right.
Yeah.
So they actually went over before they had the complete knowledge of exactly what was going on.
Yeah, and the Depression was in full swing here, so it was really bad in the late 1930s. People didn't have. I mean, it was awful. Being a couple generations removed from that, we laugh about it because people who my grandmother here, my mom's mom, for example, she saved rubber bands in case you might need them. I mean, she saved everything because in the Depression you made do. So they never threw clothes away. Everything became, you turned it around, you made something else, or you made a rag. I mean, that mentality affected our people here.
We talk about recycling, but over
They
there
really
they recycled everything.
Absolutely,
didn't they?
absolutely.
Even paper,
Yes.
scraps,
Yeah.
you name it.
So yeah, absolutely. A difficult time, no matter where you were. I mean, that was really hard. Of course, a few years later, it became harder, and then the wonderful 50s hit when I was born, and everything was great.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
Well, under Hitler, it was what do they call it? Authoritarian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you ever
very much
seen
so.
any of the videos with my dad? Actually, refers in the book. He never met Hitler or never saw Hitler, but they took him to a parade one day. Do you remember that part where they're walking along and he could see Hitler's hat?
Yeah.
So when he got home, his mom asked, "Did you see the Fuhrer?" And he said, "Well, I saw his hat." So that was as close as he got to Hitler. But if you ever watch any of the videos, he was a very dynamic personality. You could just really see how he could, that crowd control. I mean, I can feel it even if it's in German. I can see that, and appealing to your national pride, and so my grandmother, she really was, like I said, she hated Hitler. This is my grandmother when she was young. You can kind of see how solemn she is. She often didn't smile in her pictures. And then this is one of the pictures that's in the book as well of my Opa and the 3 children. But she really was so outspoken. And this is one story I do remember them telling us, that she was so outspoken against Hitler that everybody was worried they were going to cart her away in the middle of the night because she just spoke her opinion no matter what. And then they went into this house where there was a picture of the Fuhrer on the wall. She turned it around to face backwards. And they're like, if somebody comes in,
Right. That was a very dangerous thing to
yes,
do.
absolutely. So she was just like, this man, what's wrong with this man? Again, many of the Germans really didn't understand what Hitler was doing until it was too late.
Yeah.
And she lived on the edge. When they moved out of the apartment, it's mentioned in the book too, she takes the picture off the wall and she throws it in the wastebasket and it shatters. They're like, what if somebody sees that?
She
They'll arrest
stomped
you.
on it.
Yeah, she
The-
did.
The
Yeah.
officer came in
Yeah.
and caught her with her foot in the wastebasket.
Yeah,
boy.
but he didn't notice.
He didn't know it was a
didn't-
picture, huh?
Yeah, he didn't pay attention. So, but I remember them telling us that always growing up. We were always afraid for Oma, and we were like, we didn't have dictators here, so my cousins and I didn't understand it at all.
Yeah.
And I think really for the 4 of us that it really came together when we read the book. My Aunt Romy had 3 children, and I'm my only from my parents, and then the youngest one, Hannah, didn't have any. She didn't ever marry and have children.
Yeah.
She stayed at home with her parents.
Yeah. They had a rough time.
They did. They did have a tough time. So, but they settled in because my grandparents were there, and I had a picture of my Oma's parents that were there. If I can find it here. My grandparents were there, so they sort of settled in, and they were. These are my Oma's parents who were living in Germany when they went back, and so they visited with them, and then.
These people stayed in Germany. Right?
Yes, they
were
had never left. Yeah.
Right,
So when my grandparents went back, so these would be my great grandparents. They were there, and they were settled. So they had family there too.
Sure.
And my grandfather, my dad's dad, had 2. He had two sisters that stayed in Germany also. My opa was the only one who came to the U.S. So they did have family over there, and they were really close. This is my dad's aunt, his father's sister Ella, and her husband, and my dad's cousin. But I never met them because they stayed in Germany.
Have you been to Germany?
I have not. My husband's been several times, but it's on my list, and I'm planning to do that.
It's on your to-do list.
Yes,
huh?
on my to-do list, but I haven't made it yet.
Okay.
Did
Hoping
all
to
your
go soon.
family live in Hamburg?
My grandmother was a Hamburger, but my grandfather was from Kessel. We used to always joke that we had a hamburger and a Frankfurter for grandparents, but he lived in Kessel, and that's where it's on the Kiel Canal off the Elbe River, and that's where Tante Alfreda, who was the oldest sister, who was a school teacher who didn't marry either, she lived there continuously through.
As far as you know, all the relatives survived the war?
Yes, Ella died very young, but it was before I was born, and I don't remember the circumstances of it, but I don't think she died in the war.
Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing how things work, that they all made it through pretty unscathed.
Yeah.
Well, obviously there were psychological scars, and I was showing Don before the show that this is my aunt and my dad got to come back in 1946. My grandparents couldn't come back that early, but you can count all the ribs on my dad.
Yeah, this was right after the
Right,
war?
that's right after they came back, before the rest came back. So they're both teenagers in there, and this is the third girl in the picture. Annalisa would kill me. Is my aunt Annalise, who is referred to in the book too. They lived in Germany, and they kind of took care of my dad when he couldn't go home. There was no place for him to go. He was kind of on his own, and so Annalise's mother would alter the uniforms and things like that. But I think my dad, because my grandfather was 6'1", and my dad only got to be about 5'8", and he felt it was partly because during his growth spurt he had such poor nutrition during the war in Germany.
Nutrition has a lot to do with it.
Yeah,
Yes.
and Hitler ran out of men, invading right and left, and so they were drafting. It was almost like a Boy Scout thing at first, as Hitler's youth, came through, and they actually put them to work as the war progressed, doing all kinds of men-sized jobs.
But tell them about your dad, Herbert. He was drafted. He had to give up his U.S. citizenship.
And my opa too. I mean, they all did.
Oh, I didn't know
Well,
she was a citizen.
He was. My opa was a citizen. He was naturalized, but when you come to the U.S., you can come on an immigrant visa, and then you can become a permanent resident, and that's what my grandmother did because she didn't speak English well enough at the time. You have to speak English well enough to pass a test and so on, unless you're a child. If you're a child and your father or mother gets citizenship, then you can too. So my opa, who spoke English very well, he became a naturalized citizen. So he actually had U.S. citizenship, and of course the 3 children who were born here did. But the Germans didn't allow that, and so they drafted. The other big thing was, of course, I think if people watch The Sound of Music, in The Sound of Music,
of the parallel there.
Yes, where they say to him, "You will report at this point," and that's what they did. You had no choice. You speak English. You need to come, and I'm sure that my grandfather, was a hot commodity because he spoke English so well. And so they said, you will come and you will report. And when we were growing up, we knew that he had been forced to translate documents and things along those lines. Sure. But my grandfather, of course, if you're German, you love where you came from. I mean, and you want to be proud of your heritage. But my grandfather loved all things American. And my aunts and my dad, too, And so given the chance, they would have left, and they could have left as the war progressed and as the war began. My grandfather and the 3 children could have gone home, but my grandmother couldn't. She was a German national, just a permanent resident. She couldn't leave. They couldn't leave her, and that was how they explained to us why they stayed there. what do you want us to do? Do you want us to leave your mother behind? Is what they told the children.
Sure.
Well, what can you do? And my Aunt Hannah was, 4 or 5? She was really little. And so, it just wasn't thinkable. They just couldn't, they couldn't have done that. And so they all stayed. And had something that was worth writing a book about, because they had so many adventures. In wartime, it makes for good reading. You don't want to live through it if you can avoid it.
Yeah.
Much better to be in your armchair, but they did have amazing adventures that are.
Yeah. Your grandfather was, drafted,
Yes.
and I believe he was made a guard then at
I don't remember his role. I remember him doing translation and being moved from place to place.
yes.
But I don't remember all the specifics. It's been a little bit since I read the book.
Yeah.
And like I said, they didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he did have he did have a lot of, he was privy to some of the information of some of the things that were going on. And so where he could, he would warn the family, this is going to happen, you need to do this. And they were all separated, and they didn't live together after the war really picked up. And so they were constantly like snatching time here and there, visiting back and forth, as Oma and Hannah stayed together. My grandmother and my youngest aunt stayed together, but the 2 oldest had to go out to the country and had to live with.
Yeah, that's what got me, the way they split up the families.
They did.
Yes.
Yeah. But again, I think if you think back to London too, with some of the air raids and some of the things that were going on, I think that wasn't so uncommon in the day.
Well, I mean, like your aunt, what was her name?
Rosemary.
Romy.
Yeah, Romy
they
for
called
short.
her. Yeah. She was sent to a farm, I believe,
She was.
to
She
work
did not want to go.
for a year.
Yes.
Yeah. And the boy, your dad, Herbert,
Yes.
was sent to this boys' school, and he ended up in an aircraft.
Right, he did. This is the
At
the
14
group
years
of
old.
everybody, his students, and they actually kept touch with each other.
No.
Several years later, this is the
No.
group that worked together.
This is a group. This is not necessarily a family.
No, those are the boys that were working together
Right.
on the anti-aircraft scenario.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so they stayed together. This one right here is my dad in this picture
That's
here.
your father.
Yeah.
Is the teacher in that group picture?
I don't.
He kind of kept them together, as I recall.
I don't know. There's an older gentleman there, but I don't know who he is. I didn't expect. My father finished the book he got the shipment of books in December, and he died in January.
I know.
So we just didn't expect, or November, late November, early December. So we just didn't expect it. We thought we'd have more time to ask questions. And I remember us sitting and going through the pictures and kind of talking about some of that, but you think you have a little more time to get more information. And my Aunt Romy, she lived in Florida. My cousins all live in Florida. They moved from New York to Florida when they retired. And but her memory was, she had Parkinson's disease, and so her memory and her speech weren't what they had been. And they were afraid to tell her even that my dad had died, because they were so close. And because her memory was so bad, they'd say, "Oh, yeah, you just talked to him, I remember when you talked to him and he said such," and try not to lie to her, but, not to, because he always thought she was just about the perfect woman. And she was very beautiful, a very beautiful girl when she was young. That's another picture of her when she was young. And so she had actually had her own story too, just a little off the topic, but she didn't publish it, or get it ready for publication, but she wrote her own memoirs from the war, because everybody had a story. That's the thing, everybody has a story. Right. And hers was a romance. She was separated from her boyfriend, and they got together after their respective spouses died. They found each other, and they did a TV show on that in Germany, actually, because he stayed in Germany too.
Yeah.
Now, did your father get a diploma after he finished school?
He did. And he had several degrees, my dad. He was an inventor. This is a picture of him in his prime.
This is your father?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's when he was young. And I think he's gorgeous, isn't he? Isn't he good looking? And, and he thought all things New York were great. You know how New Yorkers are? I don't know if you guys know New Yorkers, but he thought everything from New York was great. So he came here to study at ITT Tech.
Yeah.
So he was an electrical engineer, and he also had a degree in computer programming, and he was an inventor. He invented a form of sonar. I worked at Magnavox for several years. And so he just ended up meeting my mom and staying in the Midwest, and he became a good Midwesterner, but he always drove like a New Yorker.
You don't know what years he was at Tech, do you?
No, I can't tell you exactly when he came.
I went to Tech myself,
Did
so
you?
I was thinking there might coincidence there.
Yeah.
Might have been there at the same time.
Yeah,
I
might
don't
have
know.
been. He
I
stayed
don't
at the
know.
Y. He actually,
across the
that's where
street.
he
Yeah.
actually took rooms at the Y and stayed there for a while. So,
Mm-hmm.
so he did. You know, they did recover from some of the scars in the war, but never to the place. Like growing up, we just had bits and pieces. So as he was writing this book, which took him 7 years, and he was researching, and he said, "I'm going to write it as a novel because I don't want to double check every." You know, he did check as much as he could, but he's like, I don't remember exactly when this happened. So I'm going to say that it was here. What were the exact words from this conversation? So he wrote it in a novelized form, but it was all true. He
Sure.
checked as much as he could, double checked. And so again, reading through it was really good. Probably also, this is my Opa in his Nazi uniform. And again,
that is a Nazi uniform.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's the uniform
right.
that he was wearing, and he was very unhappy about it. But you do what you have to.
You don't
in
have any
wartime.
choice.
Yeah, you do what
Yeah.
you have to.
Okay.
Yeah, he would have been sent to a concentration camp
Yeah,
if he
no
hadn't.
choice.
Yeah.
And then his family would have been without funds or
They
anything.
loved Germany. They hated Hitler, but they loved Germany.
Yeah.
You know, and so you're stuck. What do you do? It was difficult.
I had one trip to Germany, and I enjoyed it real well. It was
Beautiful place.
Oktoberfest.
Of course. Of course, yes.
So I enjoyed
Yes,
it.
Right. Beautiful place. And most of us, many of us in the United States are German. All across the Midwest, you look
Sure.
at heritage. We had to call what they had to call sauerkraut liberty cabbage, for example, or
Oh, yes.
some of those things.
Fort Wayne here has quite a settlement of
They do.
Germans.
Yes.
They
Yes,
do.
they do.
Absolutely.
And it's been good for the city. It has.
Well, Germans have a lot of good qualities. Hardworking
do.
and responsible and you know, and they're growing up I didn't think so. I thought some other cultures were more exotic and exciting, but you know, as you get older, it's wonderful if you have people who are hardworking and value education and value, you know, family and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So,
My wife's dad was German. His parents were from Germany. And hardworking, yes.
Yeah.
yeah.
And
So-
it went down to my wife. She's a hard worker too.
There you go.
I think it's interesting that there was a prisoner of war camp here in Fort Wayne,
Yes.
Oh
yes.
dear.
and how the German residents of Fort Wayne took them into their homes even
Yeah.
to entertain them, and so much different than we were treated. I wasn't a prisoner, but the
Well-
prisoners in Germany were.
Sure. Here the prisoners
Treated very badly.
felt so welcomed and everything that they wouldn't have stepped
They
out
wanted
of
to
line for
stay
nothing.
here.
I mean, they wasn't going to do anything
They
to threaten
did,
her.
and maybe some of them did. I'm not sure.
Yeah, my wife's brother-in-law was a interpreter for the Germans here in Fort Wayne. We're out of time.
Okay.
We'll have to continue this the next program.
All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you for having me.
Well, hope you enjoyed the show. It's been a different show than what we usually have. I've enjoyed listening to Vicki and Don. Just tune in next week and we'll continue on with this story. Thank you and good night. Remember, freedom is not free. Thank you.